Good morning, everyone. There's a weight in this room. Maybe it's in the air, maybe it's in our hearts. It's the weight of things we don't say, the questions we don't ask, the truths we don't speak. We carry that silence, and it carries consequences. Today, I'm here to remind you of something profound, and yes, uncomfortable, your silence is killing them. It's killing the people who look to you for strength but feel unseen. It's killing the relationships that could thrive if only we dared to be honest. And maybe, just maybe, it's even killing a part of you, the part that knows you were made for more than playing it safe. We tell ourselves stories to justify our silence. I don't want to rock the boat. What if they think less of me? Maybe someone else will speak up, but here's the truth: silence doesn't protect us. It isolates us. And worse, it harms those who need us to be brave. Speaking up doesn't mean shouting louder than everyone else. It means finding the courage to say, this matters. It means letting compassion, not fear, guide your voice. Today, I want to share 5 keynotes to challenge you, stretch you, and maybe even change you. The cost of silence is greater than the risk of speaking. Silence often feels safe. It feels like a way to protect ourselves, our reputations, our relationships, our comfort. When we choose silence, we tell ourselves stories to justify it. It's not my place to say something. What if I'm wrong? What if speaking up makes things worse? But here's the truth: silence doesn't protect. It isolates, it erodes, and it perpetuates harm. The cost of staying silent far outweighs the risk of speaking. Think about the moments in history when silence allowed injustice to flourish. Wars have been fought, lives have been lost, and entire communities have suffered because people who could have spoken up chose to stay quiet. And while those are large-scale examples, the same principle applies to our everyday lives. When we stay silent in the face of harm or wrongdoing, we contribute to it. A bystander who says nothing becomes part of the problem. Silence in these moments isn't neutral, it's an active choice. By staying silent, we align ourselves with whatever we're afraid to confront, whether it's injustice, dishonesty, or dysfunction. But let's zoom in further. Silence doesn't just hurt others, it hurts us too. Think about the personal toll. Relationships suffer silence, and relationships breeds resentment, misunderstanding, and disconnection. If you're holding in frustration, fear, or even love that you're too afraid to express, the relationship weakens over time. Integrity erodes every time we choose silence over speaking our truth. We chip away at our authenticity. We start to feel like we're living half lives, suppressing who we really are. Missed opportunities. How many times have we missed out on growth, connection, or change because we didn't have the courage to speak up? Silence keeps us stagnant, while speaking up opens doors to new possibilities. It's also important to recognize that silence can harm those we care about. Imagine someone struggling, whether it's a friend, a partner, or a colleague. They might not have the words to ask for help, but your voice could be the one that brings clarity or offers them hope. Your silence, however, leaves them alone in their struggle. Now let's talk about the fear behind speaking up. Yes, there's a risk. You might be judged, misunderstood, or even face consequences. But what's the alternative? A life where you never take a stand for what matters. A world where harm continues because no one was willing to speak against it. Here's the shift we need to make. Instead of focusing on the discomfort of speaking up, focus on the consequences of staying silent. Ask yourself, who will this silence hurt? What would happen if I said nothing? What kind of person do I want to be in this moment? Courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means recognizing the fear and speaking up anyway. Every time you do, you're practicing bravery, strengthening your voice, and becoming someone who chooses truth over ease. So yes, speaking up carries risks, but silence carries far greater ones: the risk of harm growing unchecked, of relationships unraveling, of a life lived in regret. Choose courage, because the cost of silence is simply too high. Authenticity is contagious. There's something magnetic about authenticity. When we encounter someone who is unapologetically themselves, someone who isn't hiding behind a mask of perfection or trying to meet everyone else's expectations, it shifts the atmosphere. We can feel it. It's freeing, inspiring, and often profoundly moving. Authenticity isn't just about being honest or transparent. It's about showing up as your true self, flaws and all, without fear of judgment. It's a kind of courage that invites others to do the same. When you're authentic, you give people permission to step into their own truth. It's like lighting a torch in a dark room. Suddenly, everyone around you can see more clearly, including themselves. Think about it. Have you ever witnessed someone share a personal story, admit a mistake, or express a vulnerability? How did it make you feel? Chances are it didn't make you think less of them. On the contrary, it probably deepened your respect for them. Their openness made it easier for you to connect with them on a human level. Why is this? Because authenticity resonates with something deep inside us. It speaks to our shared humanity. We're all imperfect and we all crave connection. But true connection can only happen when we're willing to be real. Pretending to have it all together might earn admiration, but it won't foster genuine relationships. Now, let's consider the ripple effect of authenticity. Authenticity breaks down barriers. When you're authentic, you create a safe space for others to lower their guard. Your willingness to be real shows them that they don't. Avoiding discomfort protects no one. Discomfort, it's something most of us spend our lives trying to avoid. We tiptoe around it, distract ourselves from it, and build walls to keep it out. And in the short term, avoiding discomfort can feel like the easiest, most sensible thing to do. But here's the hard truth: avoiding discomfort doesn't protect us or anyone else. In fact, it often does more harm than good. Why? Because discomfort is a signal. It tells us that something needs attention, that something isn't quite right. It's like an alarm going off in our hearts, our relationships, or our communities. And when we ignore it or try to silence it, the underlying issues don't go away. They grow. Think about how discomfort shows up in our daily lives. In relationships, we avoid hard conversations because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings or make things awkward. But what happens when we stay silent? Resentment builds, misunderstandings multiply. The relationship suffers because we weren't willing to address the root of the problem. In the workplace, we see something unethical or problematic, but we choose not to speak up. It's not my place, we tell ourselves. Or, I don't want to make waves, but by staying quiet, we allow toxic behaviors to persist and even thrive, creating a culture where no one feels safe. In personal growth, discomfort comes when we face our fears, stretch beyond our comfort zones, or confront painful truths about ourselves. Avoiding it might feel good in the moment, but it keeps us stuck, unable to grow into the people we're meant to be. Let's be honest, discomfort is hard. It's messy. It makes us feel vulnerable, exposed, and uncertain. But here's what we need to understand: discomfort is also necessary. It's a teacher. It's the birthplace of growth, connection, and change. Imagine a world where everyone avoided discomfort. What would that look like? Would we have civil rights movements, groundbreaking innovations, deep, meaningful relationships? Probably not. Every great moment of progress, whether on a societal level or a personal one, has required someone to lean into discomfort, to face it head on instead of running from it. Here's why avoiding discomfort doesn't protect anyone. Silence is a form of communication. We often think of silence as the absence of communication, but in reality, silence is its own form of language. It speaks volumes whether we intend it to or not. When we choose not to speak, we're still sending a message that can be as impactful as words, and sometimes even more so. Silence isn't neutral, it's active. It shapes relationships, influences situations, and conveys emotions. The question is, what are we communicating when we choose silence? And is it aligned with what we truly feel or believe? When silence speaks loudly. In relationships, imagine you're in an argument with a loved one. They're upset, but instead of addressing the issue, you stay silent. What does that silence say? To the other person, it might communicate indifference, avoidance, or even rejection. Silence can create a chasm in relationships, leaving people to fill the void with assumptions, often the worst ones. Alternatively, silence can be a way to withhold love or validation, a tool to exert control. This kind of silence, often called the silent treatment, is deeply damaging. It creates isolation instead of resolution and erodes trust. In times of injustice, when we witness something wrong, discrimination, dishonesty, or harm and say nothing, our silence sends a message of complicity. It says, this is okay, or this isn't my problem. History is full of moments where silence allowed injustice to persist, from systemic racism to environmental destruction. Our silence in these moments doesn't protect the vulnerable, it harms them. It reinforces the status quo and perpetuates harm. In leadership, silence can be deadly. A leader who stays silent in the face of conflict or crisis, courage is a skill, not a trait. When we think of courage, we often imagine it as an inherent trait, something you're either born with or you're not. We picture fearless leaders, heroes who act boldly in the face of danger, or people who seem to take risks without hesitation. It's easy to assume they're simply braver than the rest of us, that they have something we don't. But this view is misleading. Courage isn't a fixed quality like eye color or height. It's a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned, developed, and strengthened over time. It's not about being fearless, it's about taking action despite fear. Courage is what happens when we choose to do what's right, even when it's hard, uncertain, or uncomfortable. Why courage is a skill. It requires practice. No one wakes up one day and suddenly becomes courageous in every area of their life. Courage is built moment by moment, decision by decision. The first time you speak up in a meeting, confront a difficult truth, or stand up for someone else, it feels terrifying. But the next time, it feels a little easier. With each act of courage, you strengthen your ability to face fear and uncertainty. It grows with experience. Courage is like a muscle, it gets stronger the more you use it. The situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. This is why people who consistently push themselves outside their comfort zones often appear naturally courageous. It's not that they were born that way, it's that they built the skill through experience. It can be taught and modeled. We learn courage by observing it in others. A teacher who encourages students to share their ideas, even when they're unsure, teaches them courage. A leader who admits their mistakes and owns their vulnerabilities models courage for their team. These moments show us that courage isn't about perfection. It's about showing up and trying, even when the outcome is uncertain. What does building courage look like? Starting small. Courage doesn't always mean taking giant leaps. Sometimes it's in the small, everyday choices, asking the difficult question, saying no when it's easier to say yes, or raising your hand when you'd rather stay invisible. These small acts build your courage over time, preparing you for the bigger challenges ahead. Facing fear, not eliminating it. One of the biggest myths about courage is that it means being fearless. But fear is a natural part of life. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, it's to move forward in spite of it. When you feel fear, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And what's the best that could happen if I try? Failing forward. Courage isn't about always succeeding. In fact, failure is often a key part of the process. Each time you fail and get back up, you reinforce your resilience and your willingness to try again. Courage means embracing failure as a teacher, not a stopping point. why courage is necessary. It drives growth. Whether it's personal growth, professional development, or societal change, courage is the engine that moves us forward. Without it, we stay stuck, trapped in fear, complacency, or the status quo. It builds connection. Courage isn't just about grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as being vulnerable with another person. Sharing your feelings, admitting your fears, or asking for help requires courage, but it also deepens connection. It inspires others. When you act courageously, you give others permission to do the same. Your bravery becomes a model for those around you, showing them what's possible when we choose to act despite fear. The takeaway: if courage were a trait, something you either had or didn't, you'd be stuck with whatever amount you were born with. But because it's a skill, it's accessible to everyone. You can build it, you can practice it. You can grow it little by little, choice by choice. The world doesn't need perfect people. It needs people who are willing to try, fail, and try again. It needs people who understand that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act anyway. Courage is within your reach, no matter who you are or where you start. All you have to do is take that first step. Then another, and another. Before you know it, courage will no longer feel like a distant ideal. It will feel like a part of who you are. Ending the speech, your courage is the spark. As we stand here today, I want you to think about this. Every act of courage, no matter how small, is a spark. It lights up the darkness, it ignites change, and it inspires others to find their own strength. The beauty of courage is that it doesn't require you to be perfect, fearless, or unshakable. It only asks that you try, that you show up, that you take one step toward what matters, even if your hands are trembling or your voice shakes. So ask yourself, where in my life can I choose courage today? Maybe it's speaking up in a difficult conversation, taking a leap toward a long-held dream, or standing up for someone who needs your voice. Whatever it is, remember, courage isn't something you wait for. It's something you build moment by moment, choice by choice. The world doesn't need more silence, avoidance, or fear. It needs your authenticity, your bravery, and your willingness to step into discomfort for the sake of growth, connection, and truth. Your courage is the spark. Light it and watch what happens. Thank you.